Nice to see you.
Hi, you too.
Counselor Edwards, nice to see you. Margaret, excellent. Counselor Flynn, Counselor Baker.
Good morning, Kenzie.
Morning, how are you, Frank?
Good.
Staying cool?
I'm trying.
I know it's
I know I owe you a call. I'll maybe we'll talk this afternoon or tomorrow sometime.
all right, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. Drew, we're not expecting anybody else besides you and Margaret, right?
That's correct.
Great. And central staff, are we ready to go? Carrie, Candace.
Hi, Madam Chair. We're live and recording, ready to go.
Fantastic. Great. All right, then without further ado, I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach, District 8 City Councilor. I'm the chair of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee. And we're having this hearing today on docket 0686, message and order approving a declaration of trust entitled East Boston Housing Stabilization Trust Fund, which was filed by the administration. This hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. And we're joined here today by Councilor Lydia Edwards of District 1, which includes East Boston, Councilor Ed Flynn of District 2, and Councilor Frank Baker of District 3. I'm also grateful for the attendance from the administration of Drew Smith, the head of Treasury, and also a deputy CFO for the city, and Margaret Dyson, the trust manager at Treasury. So I think what I'd like to do is go first to councilors for opening statements. And I'm going to start with Councilor Edwards. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'll actually go Councilor Flynn and Councilor Baker. I'll go to you very briefly just to say hello to everybody. And then I'm going to go to Councilor Edwards because I'm going to ask Councilor Edwards to kind of give us a bit of context about where this trust came from as it's her district. And then I will turn to Drew Smith and Margaret Dyson to walk us through the documents before us. So Councilor Flynn, did you want to say a brief word?
Thank you, Councilor Block. Councilor Block, I just wanted to say thank you for your work on this important initiative, and obviously thank Councilor Edwards as well. Thanking Margaret and Drew. I'm here to learn more about it and to support my colleague, Councilor Edwards. Thank you again, Councilor Block.
Great, thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Baker?
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Edwards, for putting this forward. Very interested, similar to Councilor Flynn. Listen, learn. If this is about keeping development dollars in the neighborhoods that they're generated in, I'm all in. I'd be interesting to see the take on, if anybody remembers Jimmy Kelly trying to do something like this similar years ago, if it's the same sort of thing, if there's any historical knowledge of any of those discussions around it at some point when we talk this through. But glad to be here and glad to participate. Thank you. And thank you for having the meeting, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Baker. And now, as I said, I'd like to have Councilor Lydia Edwards give her opening statement and also just sort of start us off by providing some context about this trust fund that's before us today. Because although this is the first hearing on the docket in the City Council, and it only came to the City Council a week and a half ago, there's a long prior conversation and set of discussions that preceded this. So I'd like us to give the public a little bit of context on that. So Councilor Edwards, you have the floor. Councilor Edwards, you're muted.
How about now?
We can hear you great.
Excellent. Thank you, Chairwoman Bach. I'm happy to give some context and to give a little bit explanation of how this has come about. This is technically not unprecedented. Yes, as you mentioned, we just introduced this specific trust to the body, but as many people know, we have hundreds of trusts within the city of Boston. And so this is creating a specific neighborhood trust as part of the mitigation for the single largest private development in Boston history, which is Suffolk Downs. And the impact of Suffolk Downs on the neighborhood today, we can feel it right now. If we're going to be building and moving and growing, we needed also to make sure there were certain safeguards put into the neighborhood to prevent displacement. And so we wanted the city and the developer to be at the table to help guide that conversation. And so as part of the mitigation, the developer had offered to help bring up the total amount of affordable units from 13 to 20%. All right? So 13% of those units will be built on site in the future. And it's going to take 20 years to build that. The other 7% is supposed to be brought to us today in dollars or in units in East Boston as it is right now to help us. So that's a little over 500 units. And some of that will be accounted for in these dollars with this trust.
Recording in progress.
I'm good?
Yeah,
Some
you're
of it
good. Sorry about that.
Some of it will be the money that we're discussing right now. Some of it will be land that will be coming up, and some of it will be from future linkage dollars. In any event, in order for us to receive as a city and as a body, as a neighborhood funds, we needed to create this body, this entity, this trust. And that's what we're doing today. The first $2.5 million from the developer of the total of the $5 million line item of mitigation has been received by the city. And it needs to go someplace. So that's what this is going to create, that place for it to go. Not only that, but this is a trust. And what we wanted to make sure was that we had a complete accountability and transparency. And having sat on the Neighborhood Housing Trust and worked with Drew and worked with D&D already, I know that it was a wonderful marriage and partnership to have all of us at the table. An accountant from the city, as well as the legal acumen, and also honestly the treasury department there to help us understand how the money moves and what we have. This was all great. And this, honestly, I have to say thank you to Drew, to Margaret, to the city for saying without a doubt that they would be happy to be part of this. I want to thank them for that. We also didn't want to for any controversy for this money, $2.5 million, total of $5 million, and subsequent dollars that could come through, to go to any one individual nonprofit in the neighborhood or CDC. We knew the controversy that can come from that. We wanted it to be a little bit above the neighborhood, but guided by the neighborhood. Finally, we wanted to make sure that, as I mentioned, guided by the neighborhood, the trustees of this trust would be East Bostonians, folks from the neighborhood who will be part of helping to distribute these funds. And the goal of the funds is to help people become homeowners and to prevent displacement with rent assistance. We finally wanted this trust to be something that lives on for as long as there's funds to come into it. So while the first $2.5 million is going to be poured into it, we are also constantly negotiating and talking with developers about how they can help contribute directly to this fund to help fight against displacement and to help people stay in East Boston. And I'm happy to say that that's actually part of some of the mitigation that we included in the affirmatively furthering for housing amendment that Councilor Bach and I worked on so greatly, as a suggestion that there be a neighborhood fund and people work together to help fund and the neighborhood distribute it. Now, to deal with Councilor Baker's question about Jimmy Kelly, we understand that he was leading and working on a neighborhood, fund, but I don't know that it was going to be in direct partnership with the city, as in the city will have this money. This is not going into any individual nonprofit, right? The city also has an accountant and the lawyer there to make sure that we are fully transparent. And in this case, the District 1 City Council will have nominating, but the mayor will have appointing authority for majority of the trustees. And then myself and the senator and the rep will sit ex officio for our representatives. I don't know much about the structure that Jimmy Kelly was building. I just know that he wanted to make sure that neighborhood dollars stayed in the neighborhood. This was to avoid any controversy and allow for partnership with the city. So I don't know if that is exactly what he was proposing. I just wanted to make sure that you understood what we have on the table. So I think that that's it. This is a promise that we're trying to fulfill. And I think we're all excited about doing this. So thank you, Councilor Bach, for the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards, for those remarks. And indeed, I do just want to underscore that in one of the it is in the affirmatively furthering fair housing policy, one of the sort of additional things that people can do when they're doing big PDAs, big projects, et cetera, is to look at a kind of neighborhood housing stabilization fund. And this obviously, I think, would end up being the model for that. I'm so excited to be here today. I want to go now to Drew Smith. As I said, he's our head of treasury and also our deputy CFO for the city, and Margaret Dyson, and let them talk a little bit from the city's perspective about this trust in the context of trust generally, and then maybe walk us through a bit some of the details of how this one is constituted. Drew?
Great. Thanks very much, Councilor, or Chair, Madam Chair, for having us, and also councilors for having us. As the chair had indicated, my name is Drew Smith. I'm Deputy CFO and Head of Treasury for the city, and I'm joined by Margaret Dyson, who's the Trust Manager for the City of Boston. So if I can't answer one of your questions today, I guarantee Margaret can, or the two of us can cobble together an answer, hopefully, or certainly get back to you. So aside from cash and debt management, revenue collection, investment management, and myriad other functions, Treasury is responsible for the management of over 300 testamentary and non-testamentary municipal trusts. These trusts, some of them hundreds of years old. As a matter of fact, up until a few years ago, we had Ben Franklin money still, but they're in place to support specific functions from providing heating assistance to Boston residents most in need to the support of public art. The trust proposed today is initially funded with approximately $2.5 million, as the councilor had indicated, in support of housing displacement pressure mitigation purposes in East Boston, in accordance with a master plan related to the Suffolk Downs redevelopment project located at 525 McClellan Highway in East Boston. Such activities shall include, but not be limited to, and this is all written into the trust, the purchase and imposition of income restrictions on existing market rate housing, and additional funds will be deposited in accordance with provisions of the master plan in support of short-term rental assistance to East Boston residents struggling to avoid eviction. If accepted, this trust would be supported programmatically by staff of the Department of Neighborhood Development, and from an accounting and investment management perspective by the team here at Treasury. As proposed, the governing authority of the trust would be composed of 9 trustees, with 6 of those trustees appointed by the mayor from a slate of 12 nominations made by the District 1 City Councilor. 3 seats would be held ex officio by the District 1 City Councilor, the state senator, and the state representative representing East Boston. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this trust or any trust.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Drew. And I think it's fair to say, my understanding, right, is that, or tell me if this is right, because it's again, it's sort of a stab at the question of Frank's question. So I think Councilor Baker, that in the past, including possibly under the when Jimmy Kelly was the District 2 councilor, there were various proposals to kind of segment linkage, which is obviously like a formal, it's a formal like city exaction, right? That comes into the central trust, the central linkage trust. And my understanding is there was an effort to segment that. I think that in this case, this is not the linkage money for the project. This is a separate amount of money that the developer has committed. And so as such, it's not like the trust is a way for the city of Boston to hold that money and make sure it's spent on appropriate purposes and with appropriate governance, but it's not a way of segmenting that existing linkage money, whether for housing or jobs, and kind of like putting it off to the side. Is that a fair distinction, Drew, that I'm making?
That's correct. The linkage dollars have 2 existing trusts that they flow into, the Neighborhood Jobs Trust and the Neighborhood Housing Trust. That doesn't change. This is simply a separate housing stabilization fund set up, or a trust set up to accept this particular money and any additional money that would be added to it. But no, it's not linkage dollars. That's totally separate.
If I may.
Yes, Councilor Edwards.
I do want to be totally transparent that there has been discussion, and there is on our cooperation agreement, that a certain percentage of some linkage dollars will be going to, again, helping with the 20% obligation of the developer. I don't know that that necessarily means they're coming into this trust, but I do know that there's a commitment of prepayment of linkage dollars to help with that. So it very well could just go to the housing trust, which is fine, but I didn't want people to think that we were not neighborhood. Sorry, tapping in specifically for the neighborhood of linkage dollars. Just total transparency.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. And Drew, could you talk a little bit about, obviously, in this, the District 1 councilor, the state rep, and the state senator would sit ex officio. I know you have other trusts where elected officials sit ex officio, because I am one of the trustees of the Boston Common Maintenance Trust, which really needs to have its next meeting. But I wondered if you could give folks sort of some context around that and the precedents for this.
Sure. So of the 300 trusts we have, they're all governed a little differently. And some trusts are set up so that there's a sole trustee, it's the collector treasurer, and some trusts are set up so that there's a board of trustees managing them. In most cases, those trustees are appointed by the mayor. In some cases, a trustee may be appointed by the city council or the president of the city council. In some cases, there is, in the case of the Brown Fund, the senior or the longest serving city councilor sits ex officio in that position. So there's a number of different ways to do this, but generally when you're talking about appointments, it's the mayor that makes appointments. In this case, that is still how appointments are made, but it is those appointments are selected from a slate of nominees provided by the District 1 city councilor. So depending on the trust you're looking at, it's going to have a slightly different governance structure, but they generally conform to the same broad principles. And this one does as well. It's most appointments are done directly by the mayor.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we should go to colleagues for their questions. I want to note that we're also joined by Councilor Julia Mejia at large. Councilor Edwards, do you have any questions? I assume because you and Treasury have talked extensively about this that you might not, but just go to you first.
I think the only concern, if there is a concern, I'd like to put on the table is I do realize that there's a certain amount of if the mayor doesn't make an appointment, right? There's about a 3-month window for the mayor to make that appointment. Since we're talking about the initial selection of them and we need this money out as soon as possible, is there any willingness to possibly make that 3 months 1 month for the initial board?
So are you asking me, Councilor?
I'm asking both of you, Councilor Bach and the treasurer.
So
because go ahead.
I'll just say on that, my preference, and I mean, I'll put it to Drew, my preference would be that we get a commitment from the administration to make those appointments in a month, only because I think that it's always ideal to write trusts in ways that stand for perpetuity instead of having like a kind of like, oh, and the first time it'll be that it's just awkward. But I don't know, Drew, how you feel. I think Councilor Edwards is saying that she would hate to see the trust wait 3 months in this instance to get set up, given the imminent displacement crisis we're in.
Well, I certainly understand the urgency behind it, and I share a sense of urgency around it. I will say I think the chair is correct in that we really do try to keep these trusts operating under the same principles no matter when the appointments are made. And once the trust is written a certain way, it's difficult to add an additional layer of kind of complexity behind it. So I would strongly prefer that even the initial appointments stick to the 3-month window, and we would just work. We're certainly happy to work with the mayor's office to see what we can do to get those appointments made quickly. And if you're able to, if this is accepted and you're able to provide those nominations, I'm happy to get those up.
Is there, again, my concern, of course, is that, I have been known to be impatient. I'll say that.
I understand.
But we are dealing with a lot. So is there any movement then, if we want to be consistent from now until the future, is there any movement then from the 3 months to say 45 days?
Understanding that most of our trusts meet on generally no more than a quarterly basis. 3 months still feels like the right number from my perspective. And if we were to, I would have to go back to the administration, to members of the administration, if we were to try to shorten that period of time at all, because that's not something I've spoken with them specifically about, but they have seen the 3 months.
Because we're what, in June? So 3 months from now, September, to start distributing much needed funds.
That would be correct. Well, and one of the things you have to consider, just so you know, is that before you're able to start distributing the funds, and this could be done relatively quickly, and I assume the counselor would be, Counselor Edwards, you would be involved in helping to draft the rules and the regs. But before funds can be distributed, you really would want to have a set of rules and regulations set up on how those distributions are to be made. So maybe that's at least work that could be done initially. Mm-hmm. It could be handed to the trustees whenever they're selected. So that may be a way to burn a little bit of time while appointments are made. But I don't anticipate that appointments are going to take long. I've not heard that they would.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Block. I don't have any questions. Just listening to the conversation, and I'm here to support my colleague, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Block, and again, thank you to Margaret and thank you to Drew.
Great, thanks, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Baker?
Yeah, thank you. And so, Madam Chair, so your understanding, and I think the way you explained it sounds about right to me. I think the other discussion that Jimmy Kelly was having years ago was around linkage, and this is a direct payment from the Suffolk Downs. The Suffolk Downs people, part of that mitigation package that was negotiated. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. And Councilor Edwards is nodding her head.
So this is developer money.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lydia.
Just to let you know, this is going to be for all developers. I'm pushing for it, at least in East Boston, to be able to contribute, hopefully, something. Yeah.
So this is also a model like I have the South Bay going on, which is going to be, 20 years, a lot of money in mitigation going towards housing. So this is a model that basically district city councils will be able to use to protect to add protections for their neighborhoods. I think that's what it seems like to me.
It very well could be. I see how excited Drew is about having 9 more trusts. But
yeah.
But still, I think
so. It is.
Sorry, go ahead, Councilor Baker. Councilor Baker, you're coming in and out, I think.
I'm in and out. I apologize, but I have a good handle of this, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the hearing, and thank you, Councilor Edwards, for putting this forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Mejia?
Hi, yes, good morning. Super excited to be here and to support my colleague on this. I think this is revolutionary in terms of how we're literally bringing people into the conversation and also creating space for community organizations and activists and advocates to help decide how and who and when these dollars get allocated. And as someone who bounced from place to place, growing up as a kid, I don't want people to continue to live with that fear. And so this intentionality really sets the stage for that. So I just have a few questions. How will the trust decide what market rate housing to impose income restrictions upon? And then I'm also curious to Drew's point about the rules and regulations about how the money is being distributed. How will we ensure that nonprofits are helping to offer rental assistance, are accessing community members who don't speak English, do not have internet access and cannot read or write even in their own native language? So I'm just curious about kind of like what the infrastructure is going to look like to ensure that we're tapping into our nonprofit partners in ways that we know that those who need it most will get it first.
Thanks very much for the question. So the good news is that the trust division already has a fairly good amount of infrastructure built up to support these trusts. I'm going to defer in some respects programmatically to the folks over at the Department of Neighborhood Development. I know they do a good job staffing the Neighborhood Housing Trust and making sure that there's a lot of accessibility built into that. So I probably need to defer to them on some of those questions, other than to say that we would put in place for this trust the same standards that we have in place for the Neighborhood Housing Trust as far as accessibility goes. As far as the specifics on how different things are defined and how money is to be distributed, that's generally not something by design that shows up in the actual trust document, because in the trust document, we're most interested in giving the broad outlines, because we expect in a perfect world that this document not change for 50 years at least. And so we want to make sure that it's as flexible as possible. Those types of decisions on how we're actually going to distribute the funds are normally built into a set of rules and regulations that the trustees work out amongst themselves and adopt through a public, during a public meeting. So a lot of that is to be determined, and that's really something the trustees would have to develop together.
Okay, and I saw that Councilor Edwards, you were going to say something.
Yes, and just speaking from my experience on the Neighborhood Housing Trust, we all of our meetings are public, and as with this trust meetings be public as well. And as Drew just mentioned, so anytime we're thinking about changing the rules of the housing trust, people are there and they can give comment and they can say, we agree, we don't agree, so on and so forth. We are talking about all sorts of things about what we deem to be affordable, what we deem to be displacement money, and the housing trust right now. Those conversations would happen with the trustees as well. Just also noting, who we're demanding that the trustees have certain levels of expertise and perspective. That's written in the trust, right? That they have to come, some with planning, some with some development experience, some with community organizing. Like those are put in so that specific viewpoints are at the table no matter what. And and as you know, the balance is, yes, the mayor can nominate everyone, Councilor Mejia, but the district city councilor will be putting forth the names. Excuse me, I'll be nominating, but the mayor will ultimately appoint from those names put forward. And you can rest assured that the people I put forward will absolutely represent all of East Boston. And finally, when they go to start to meet, because I will be on the trust, so will Senator Boncory, and so will Representative Madero. As we go to meet and build up these rules, it will be centered in the people who are dealing with the crisis the most, centered in their needs and the ability to get dollars to them as soon as possible.
And I appreciate the community organizers and the community organizations having a role. Are we also looking at just an everyday resident, like someone who is not involved with any group, but definitely has that perspective of just someone who has experienced housing insecurity, someone who has had to navigate the system? Just is there a prerequisite to be, fully well-versed in all things that deal with trust and all that, so that we have common folks there too? Just curious.
So I'll just read to you what the folks or their perspectives would be. Nominees from organizations focused on homelessness, nominees focused on low-income housing, nominees from immigrant housing rights, nominees from environmental justice, nominees from higher institution of higher education with expertise in affordable housing. So that's where we try to build in some expertise. And then nominees with experience in city planning. And we go out of our way to say experience and expertise, not requiring degrees though, right? Because you can have a lot of knowledge, right, and expertise and not have a degree.
Right, that's exactly.
Okay.
That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah, that it's not just, a whole bunch of intellectuals up in there.
No, I agree.
We just did everything.
Agreed.
So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. I'm excited. I'm here for all of it. I don't have any more questions other than let's just go.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Drew, I have a couple more questions, which is just, one is just for the council's knowledge, like with these trusts, obviously, there's the question of how trust funds are administered while the principal sort of sits with the city. And there's reference in the trust documents for the ability for the trust manager, which is formerly our collector treasurer, Justin Starrett, like for them to, invest the principal, like do various things. And so I just wondered if with a trust like this, would we typically put it in like its corpus in with the larger holdings of the city of Boston and invest them? Or would it be like, no, we'd probably hold it mainly in cash and CDs or something? Like just how is the money held?
Sure. So with our trusts that are expected to be held in perpetuity, we would invest the funds in the market and then distribute 5% of the corpus or 5% of the principal amount annually to the purpose. That's not what we'd be doing here. So here, every dollar that flows in is expected to flow back out. And as such, we wouldn't want to take any significant market risk. So this would be held in a cash equivalent. That's similar to how the Neighborhood Housing Trust does. We don't invest the housing trust money in the market. We keep that in a cash equivalent.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. And thank you, Councilor Edwards, for reading those. I think that was helpful just for folks watching at home. So Councilor Edwards read those 6 categories: homelessness, low-income housing, immigrant housing rights, environmental justice, higher ed with affordable housing expertise, and city planning. And as she said, there would be one person with each of those kind of areas of interest.
From East Boston.
Yes. And then those 6 are then with the 3 ex officio trustees. And so that makes a total board of 9 trustees. Drew, is there actually a place in the trust that references the promulgation of the rules and regulations? I couldn't find it with a quick search.
I'm not sure, Counselor, that it does. Margaret, is that something we normally build in? Do you know?
I don't think we call it out separately. It's an expectation that rules and regulations will need to be developed with the trustees once they're appointed.
Got it. But there's not a specific place in the trust where it sort of delineates those.
Yeah, the trust would talk about more the fiduciary obligation of the trustees, and it's their job to govern. And then the trustees would, it's generally implicit that they would understand they would have to develop a set of kind of one level lower governing docs in the rules and regs.
Got it. And to the earlier discussion with Councilor Edwards, I mean, that's something where in principle, some, interested parties could develop some draft ideas about rules or regulations to be, presented to the trustees for consideration, right, so that they kind of hit the ground running at their first meeting.
Absolutely. The only rule is that so anybody can up and decide that they want to offer suggestions on the rules and regs. What you can't do outside of a formal public meeting is for multiple trustees to deliberate. So as long as you don't deliberate and discuss it back and forth outside of a public meeting, you're fine. And you can develop ideas and then you can all come together at the same time and speak about those. You just wouldn't be able to do a deliberation without notice.
Right. So Councilor Edwards could show up with anything that her office had worked on, but you just can't pre-meet about it. Got it. No, go ahead, Councilor Edwards.
Just want to make sure, and this is partly going to be Drew and Margaret explaining the history or how things have functioned for some of this language, because I know a lot of it is trying to just be consistent. So section 3.4 says written permission, with express written permission by trust manager for disbursements. If that's normal, that's fine. But again, it's the lawyer brain in mind. So what if we have an obstinate trust manager who won't write the check?
Well, it's really important to remember the trust manager in this case serves an administrative function. Our job is to carry out the requests of the trustees so long as the request that's being made is in accordance with the terms of the trust. It's not to have an opinion. It's just—
they won't have an opinion.
No.
Okay.
Now, and just to be clear, if the trust manager ever thinks that it's not a lawful distribution or it's being used for purposes not in accordance with the trust, it's the trust manager's job not to make the payment. But that is
fiduciary duty, though, right? So that's more like beyond the opinion. It's not an opinion on how funds should be spent. Correct. Right. Okay. And then 4.1, trust amendments require sign off by the trustees. Is that unanimous, or how does that work? Is it going to be based off the normal vote structure, simple majority?
Let me just look here.
If the vote structure is already then or will be built into another document, then I'm okay with that. We'll just worry about that, what the amendments percentage needs to be.
It wouldn't necessarily have to be. I've never known. Margaret, have you ever known a trust to require unanimous agreement by trustees to amend?
No, but that is, the counselor's absolutely right. That's something that's addressed in the rules and regulations. So majorities, quorums, all of that is done through that. If there are certain sorts of things that you want a supermajority on, you can decide that as a board of trustees.
Okay. So again, I just want to make sure that I know a lot of this can be filled in the gaps, but let's see. So 10.5 is interesting to me. Again, this could be just boilerplate. If any provision of this trust or portion of such provision or the application thereof to any person's circumstances is held invalid, the trust in its entirety shall become void. Would we want a severability clause that if at some point one part is not perfect with the law, that we don't want to kill the whole trust, right?
So these sections, especially Article 10, I mean, this is all pretty boilerplate.
I know. But still, is my question clear though?
No, I understand what you're asking.
So, I understand the boilerplate point too, but man, maybe even just to protect, maybe if it was held invalid by a court or something like a high standard, but if we're going to kill the whole trust.
Well, it shall terminate in accordance with section 3.2, and 3.2 says that, so what happens is if it's ever terminated, it has to come back to the city, and then it has to be, once it comes back to the city, it has to be expended generally in accordance with the terms of the trust. So for the same purposes. So housing displacement mitigation purposes in East Boston, that would be the requirement. But you're correct. I mean, it doesn't, and a way to fix that essentially, if it were to go back to the city and it has to be spent in accordance with the terms of the original trust, in theory, what could happen is that the city would develop a new trust that meets whatever requirements, cuts out whatever was held invalid, and it's a new trust that's workable. I've never known a trust to be held invalid, but I hear your point. And as far as severability, to be honest with you, I'm not an attorney. I would have to speak with the law department.
That would be the only thing, Councillor Bach, if there's either some sort of provision, because invalid, we don't really have a standard for invalid. If it's by a court, I'd probably feel more comfortable, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Feel free to finish. Sure.
I would feel a little bit more comfortable. I do know, but invalid by who? Not sure. And then it's the lawyer in me. I know it's annoying, but it really is.
No, I think what I would like, Drew, if you could maybe inquire with the law department and get some kind of opinion. My gut is that although I think it is an important point, I also think that trust in estates law is a very specialized area, and I suspect that this is here for good reason. And so I don't really want the city council wordsmithing some of that boilerplate, because although I respect your skills as a lawyer tremendously, Councillor Edwards, I come from a family of lawyers and I know about legal specialization. My instinct, like for instance, I would not be at all surprised. Here's my non-lawyer judgment of this. I would not be at all surprised if the reason that is there is because a trust that were to be found somehow in legal defect could be like hanging in no man's land. And so the goal of that provision is to make sure that all the money just goes back to the city of Boston so you can fix it without it being in some weird netherworld. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the reason that that's there. So I think it's a totally reasonable question, and we could ask Drew to ask law to kind of figure out why that's the boilerplate. But my instinct is not for this committee to wordsmith that boilerplate.
Well, I'm not willing to die on a hill for it. I just had questions about it.
Yeah.
And if we can't wordsmith the trust part, then as Drew noted, it goes back to the city. Then if there could be some sort of clause that to consider creating a new trust or something, or to consider correcting defects of the trust or something. But that's what I would like.
Okay, let's find out, Drew, from law, what the sort of backstory on that is. Would be great. And then, shoot, I had another question that I've just totally forgotten. What was your prior?
Severability clause.
No, before 10.5. What was the one you asked about before that?
Look it up. It was about the amendments requiring unanimous consent.
Oh, that's right. So I was just going to ask, my other ask of the Treasury folks is if maybe they could send, care of this committee, and we'll pass them on to Councilor Edwards as well. Just a few examples of some rules and regs of existing trusts. I think that would be very helpful to us.
One of the things also it's important to note, Margaret, do you want to talk quickly about some of the tutorials that we like to give at the outset of a trust?
Sure. I know the question was raised by one of the counselors about, do you have to be an expert on trust to be the trustees? We can train people on what their rights and responsibilities are as trustees. We do that. We do an ethics training so that they understand their responsibilities there as well. That's a way that we can assist because we often have trustees who are subject matter experts in the purposes of the trust, but are not necessarily people who've had a lot of experience being trustees in this way. So the law department has assisted us with this. We're happy to do it. We really do see this as part of our role and something that we can contribute so that we can get subject matter experts, not trust experts necessarily.
And as a part of that process, because, at Treasury and Trust, we like to consider ourselves full service. So we're happy to show up with a template of draft rules and regs that you can basically fill in the blanks and change it however you'd like, but we're happy to do that.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Do any other counselors have further questions at this time?
No, I don't. I'm good. Thank you.
No further questions, Councilor Block. Great.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. All right. Well, I think those are all of my questions. I think just getting a follow up on that last 10.5 legal provision and yeah, some examples of rules and regs that we can pass through the chair would be great from my perspective. Councilor Edwards, any last words?
I'll just say thank you to Drew, Margaret, the Treasury folks who were, I think, steadfast and really pushed on this. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And Drew, Margaret, anything you want to say?
Not for me, Margaret. Other than to say thanks very much for having us. One of the things that we like to talk about most in Treasury is what we do with trust. So fun to be a part of it. Thank you.
Great. Well, and we really appreciate you all holding our funds in trust. That's very important for the purposes of all the good things that we want to do with money. We have to make sure the money is safely and securely held on behalf of the people of Boston. So we really appreciate your guys' work. And I'm certainly excited about this trust and, excited to recommend it for passage and grateful to Councilor Edwards and to the mayor's whole team for all this work. So thank you so much. With that, this hearing of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Recording stopped.